that will be held in Oxford debate style. The panelists are ready, I believe, as is the moderator. We're just making sure that we're finalizing everything by way of seating. But it is the closing debate, and I'm not going to steal any thunder from the moderator who will be steering the session for us, although I'd like to claim that he has stolen a bit of my thunder as a prolific podcaster on CNBC Africa. We'll discuss this later, sir. We do love your program. But of course, many of you would know him as a board member as well as a C-suite advisor. So please, let's give one last warm welcome to the stage for Mr. Sanjeev Gupta.
Is this working? Okay, great. I was facing the music just now, so maybe that's why you didn't hear me. Yeah, if I can, in no particular order, ask my fellow debaters to join me at the podium. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for hanging around and waiting to hear what I can assure you is going to be by far the best part of this particular conference. You know, we are bankers. We don't like to guarantee things, but this is as close to a guarantee as you will ever get from me. And I've got other bankers on the panel who clearly agree. Right, so as a grand finale to this event, this fantastic event that Africa 50 and its team has put together, we have created a very provocative topic to try and apply our minds to and hopefully go away with some food for thought. So the topic reads that this house believes, and it's uncanny because Mo Dewji was making a similar comment in the previous panel. This house believes that the era of multilateralism is over. African infrastructure will only be built at scale when Africa stops waiting for foreign capital and finances itself. Can I have a quick show of hands as to who supports this statement? Any more show of hands supporting this statement? Please keep your hands up because I want to see how it compares to those who go against. Okay, so it's roughly, what do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Is it an overwhelming yes? Doesn't look like. Okay. Okay, so it's around 50 to 60% saying yes. Let's see who are the ones who disagree with this, who go against this motion. Good Lord. There is some serious cynicism and skepticism in this room at MSU. You guys have your job cut out. Right, so just to set the stage and get the ball rolling, let us just make sure we all kind of agree what multilateralism is about, right? What does it mean? And I'm going to use three words to kind of explain what, to me, multilateralism is. One is, I think the very word multilateralism denotes a little bit of teamwork, a little bit of solidarity. I think the second thing that multilateralism denotes is there is some common rules. around which behavior will be judged. And I think the third element to multilateralism is what I call common cause. In other words, accept when there is a collective responsibility to be taken. Right? So I'm saying multilateralism is about teamwork, about common cause, and thirdly, any guesses what I said? The middle one? Okay, I'll come to that later. I purposely left it aside because I want you guys to think about it. Now, the point that I'm going to try and get to is that, unfortunately, as we have seen in recent times and otherwise, the world of good economics, as they say, often battles with the world of good politics. In other words, political expediency, political choices often dictate and therefore challenge multilateralism. Right? And if I may just remind you that in Davos last year, or earlier this year rather, Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, made an extremely interesting speech. And for those of you who didn't hear it, or who didn't kind of make notes on it, I'll just read out a particular section of it. He said, this is Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister. He said, we knew, he says, we knew the story of international rules-based order was partially false. That the strongest would always exempt themselves when convenient. That trade rules were always enforced asymmetrically. And we knew, this is again he saying, we knew that international law applied only with varying rigor. In other words, not consistent. But, he said, this fiction was useful when it lasted. But apparently, as per him, this bargain no longer works. Because the problem, ladies and gentlemen, we have is that the great powers have always used economic integration as a weapon, financial architecture as a weapon, supply chains as a weapon. The multilateral institutions that we rely on, the IFCs, the World Bank, the IMF, the International Court of Justice, very often is rendered impotent. We've seen evidence of that. And as a result, we are seeing today many countries going unilateral. So my question then to my panelists, to my debaters, is Quo Vadis Africa? What should Africa do when the evidence out there befuddles and confuses the mind as to whether multilateralism has indeed worked, and has it worked in Africa's favor? I have on my right-hand side, I dare say, the righteous people, the people who are going to defend this motion to their best of their abilities. And on the left, I have, not the leftists, please don't misunderstand them, but people who are going to defend multilateralism. Okay? So I'm going to start with you, Kader, because when we were doing our practice run, ladies and gentlemen, I started looking around as to who should I start with. And apart from his obvious looks and smart suit, he's the guy whose eyes was sparking and almost breathing fire And he said, I want to go first, Sanjeev. So, Kader, you are going first.
Thank you. I was, it's, my eyes were sparkling because I was hoping I was going to be on this side of the motion because I don't know how I could come up with an argument if I were on that side. And the room says it, so they have a really, really tough job, but I'll be very brief because this explains itself. So one of the saying I like is, what is the definition of insanity? It is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I'd like the guys on the other side of the room to tell me, we've been doing this for 60 years. Why is it that next year or 5 years from now it will yield different results? That has never helped any of our countries to develop themselves. So regardless of what they tell you, just remember that it has not worked. So just keep that in mind. But if you want some additional arguments from me, is that we have to take
That would help, huh? That would help.
we have to take control of our own narrative and our own destiny. Why is it that because some country somewhere decides to attack another country somewhere, we have nothing to do with it, they're going to tell you that their budget has been cut X% and that they no longer have this investment available? We are like passengers in our own destiny. That makes no sense, especially since we have the tools to not be. We have the resources that are here, and even if you tell me that developing resources will take a long time, we have, and we talked about it yesterday and on all the different conferences I've been in, look at the dry powder that is available to the pension funds on the continent that are going into government bonds or low yield assets that could go into developing some infrastructure or some industries on our continent. We have those means. And I think what you keep hearing, especially in the last 5 years, is take control of our destiny. We have the tools, we have the means, we have the capacity. Why is it that we continue to hold our hand out for people for whom we're not a priority?
Okay. So you're saying, why should we remain passengers? We have the means and we should take charge. That's what you're saying. Sarah, apart from being the only lady in this very, very distinguished panel, you have a job to do to disprove Kedar.
So Kedar has said that it has not worked, and what you are asking for is a divorce. What we're saying is we need counseling. We need to restructure the partnership on a term that works for Africa. So when I first read this notion that multilateralism is over and the thing we must do is only look for African capital to fund our infrastructure play, I smiled because I thought, well, if it was that easy, then it would be easy for us to do. But we all know as infrastructure players that it's not that easy. So my colleagues on this side have identified the right symptoms, which is important, but they have prescribed the wrong medicine. We agree on a lot of things. Africa must build its own capital market. We must deepen our pension markets. We must ensure that our pension markets work for more than it does for us now. We must ensure that our sovereign wealth funds actually own up to their mandate. And yes, we must absolutely finance our future. That is not what we're debating here. Where we disagree is that we must do that by ourselves. So the word that makes this go from an argument we can consider to completely being indefensible is only. We must only do it ourselves. What economy has only done it themselves? Economies don't thrive because they restrict the amount of capital that comes in or the sources. They thrive because they open it up. Every single economy, not Korea, not China, not India, not the US has said, we will do it ourselves. Capital is global by nature. And so what we have is a false choice. We shouldn't choose either or. What we need to do is ensure that the capital works for us. I'll make another point. We've talked about trillions available throughout this conference. And even one of my opponents has written about the trillion-dollar idle trillions in Africa. But what we do know is there are no idle trillions. Pension funds are defending retirees. Insurance companies are ensuring that they cover claims. Banks are funding businesses. Whatever is, there's no slash of money sitting somewhere saying, oh, let's go build a road. What we have is not a financing crisis. What we have is how do we turn the savings into investable infrastructure? What we have is we don't have enough preparation because capital is not really the problem. Preparation is the problem. So I need us to understand this motion that if we want to be successful, we only have to take African capital. What we need to defend, and I need you all, when we're voting, I need you to understand that what we need to defend
No
is,
lobbying yet, huh?
what we need to understand is Africa needs to make itself so attractive that both capitals fight to invest in our future. Capital is global, as I mentioned earlier, and we will take all comers on our terms, by our game, our rules, but we will not exclude any capital because that's what we need to advance. Thank you.
It reminds me of the African proverb that if you want to go far, you go alone. But if you're going to go fast, you go alone. If you go far, you go with partners. And that's the crux of what you tried to say. But I dare say that in a way you played into Keda's hands because you kind of conceded that multilateralism hasn't quite worked and some things have to get fixed. I'll let you comment later, but I'll just throw it up for you to think about. Bright, I believe Ghana got saved by the multilaterals.
I think we are offending religious norms because we just had a prayer and nobody said amen. What you heard is a plea to St. Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. She's asking for counseling. No, she's asking for an abusive relationship to persist because she's afraid of divorce. Let us explain what multilateralism has done to us. What it has done is to go back to COP26 and remember the Glasgow statement, where these people, in the name of multilateralism, attempted to ban all fossil fuel financing, and we had banks around the world signing up to this. And if it hadn't been for the plurilateral alternative, which this side is fighting for, we're not saying that don't have teams, we're not saying that don't work with others. We are saying that the notion of a one-size-fits-all, which they have euphemistically called multilateralism, is a dangerous illusion. And our example is the Glasgow statement, where an attempt was made to impose a banning of financing for fossil fuels when we are energy poor, when we didn't cause climate change, when we need to get out of energy poverty first, before we talk about any of this multilateral stuff, and if it wasn't for the fact that others, including my very good gentleman across the table, refused to accept these claims. And of course, now he's arguing for multilateralism. Tells you can't trust a banker. But the truth of the matter is very straightforward. A one-size-fits-all model, like the Glasgow statement, that says you cannot finance fossil fuels, would have meant that the beautiful LNG terminal that was just signed at this conference by Tanzania would not have worked. That is why Britain pulled out money from Mozambique's LNG projects not too long ago, even though America was willing to do it, because plurilateralism means one size doesn't have to fit all. Let me give you another example, the Basel Accords, another one-size-fits-all mess. Think of the sovereign ceiling. That says that you peg a country's credit rating more or less to the sovereign, and then the commercial banks within that country are forced essentially to operate below that ceiling. This is a silly one-size-fits-all. There are banks in this continent that clearly are more creditworthy than their sovereigns, than their governments. In simple terms, what we are saying is that yes, we can work together, but we must not work together on the basis of a one-size-fits-all model that is called multilateralism. Second, we are not saying that we should use only our capital, but only capital that we control. There's a difference. America is the world's biggest borrower, but America borrows on its own terms. You don't like the way treasuries look? Don't buy them. That's exactly what we must do. The capital must be capital we control regardless of source or origin.
Bright. A lot of pain there, man. A lot of pain. It almost felt like a confession of sorts, man. But yeah, passion is good. Passion is good. I wish you were a little more polite to the only lady in our panel, you know. But that we'll talk about later. Adamasu, okay, guys, for those of you who don't know, till half an hour back, Adamasu was supposed to be on this side of the motion. He looked at the topic, he looked at these guys and said, I'm a coward, I'm going to the other side. So, Adamasu, prove to us why multilateralism still works and works specifically for Africa.
It's this mic that's dead, not multilateralism. I'm going to come at this, first of all, by saying to my esteemed two colleagues across the aisle that you are very much angry with something that is more or less dead, but it's not multilateralism. You're angry with globalization. Okay, that's the baby that's probably on its way to being buried, especially globalization in a political sense. Multilateralism is a different baby. The bathwater is very dirty, but the baby's alive and well. Now, let me tell you what's happening with the bathwater. The bathwater is very dirty and muddy because of the things that you've been alluding to. All of these injustices, all of these contradictions, all of this unfairness, that is the dirt in the bathtub. That makes it look like the baby is dead. But the baby's not dead. We just have to clean the bathtub and pour out the dirty water and bring in some clean water. Now, here's what the clean water is. The clean water are those countries and regions of the world that remain committed to the project of multilateralism. We are all in this room because we're committed to multilateralism. African multilateralism is on the rise. It's a form of multilateralism. I remember when we were starting our strategy at TDB, we asked ourselves, can we expect African multilateralism to get a boost from the rest of the world? We realized that there were parts of the world that had the doors closed, but there were parts of the world that were very interested. And we also went across the continent and we said, historically, we were in Eastern and Southern Africa, but then we saw our friends in Ghana needed some additional financing. And instead of ignoring you, my brother, we came in and signed you on, and we crossed the divide and became an MDB that is now very active in Ghana. So you're saying we did not pick up the phone call when you called during debt restructuring. What you didn't realize is when the debt restructuring was going on, we crossed over to West Africa and asked you to join TDB, and we opened the taps. That's what really happened. And that's because the multilateralists in TDB, governors of TDB like Carla, like Ambassador Kamis, they approved that I come all the way to West Africa and step out of my comfort zone and actually start doing business in Ghana and now Senegal as well. So the baby is alive. But the African version of multilateralism is on the rise. Globalization, that form of multilateralism, especially the political type, is on the decline. They're not the same thing. And we shouldn't lose confidence that solidarity and teamwork that you talked about as being the denotions of multilateralism, it's actually given Africa a boost. Many Africans that talk about multilateralism today are on fire because we're saying the only way we can deal with this contradiction and injustice at the global level is to build our own multilateralism within Africa. AFCFTA, Agenda 2063, breaking the borders, one-stop border posts, cross-border infrastructure. I think multilateralism is actually the hope for our future.
As usual, you know, the erudite Mr. Adamasu has clearly prevailed upon our finer senses in terms of understanding the topic a little better. I think the topic, Adamasu, if I may kind of, as my role as the moderator, bring back, is not about what multilateralism can do, but what it has done. And I think, Kader, it's probably a good time to come back to you and kind of probe this a bit more. That are we disappointed? And if so, why? And are we hopeful still? If so, why?
So I like that you went there because that's what I was going to tell my dear older brother at Masu, which is we need to look at results. What he said is all fine and well. They went to Ghana, Ghana acceded to this, and we've done this. And it's the same old story. We've signed this agreement, we had this initiative. What has that yielded? Did you get the money when you needed the help?
No.
No. We have to look at results and stop being satisfied because we're moving, we're announcing, we're signing. And the results speak for themselves. They're not there. And just to be clear about this point, what we're saying is, and I said it earlier, I want us to be the master of our destiny. That means that when we're going somewhere with a car, I want us to be on the driver's seat. I didn't say nobody else gets in the car, but I say, I am driving, I am deciding. You are a passenger. You can read a map and help me with direction, but I'm deciding where I'm going, as opposed to nobody else gets in the car as the partnership. And that's where we need to get to, being us who decide, who control, who have our strategy. Bright spoke earlier about what they wanted to impose to us and say, you must develop your industry with solar. Who's ever done that? What kind of sense is this? You see what I mean? That's the part. When I'm saying we are the drive, we're making the decision that works for our economies, and those who want to help us, they come. We're not closing the door to multilateralism, even if it's African multilateralism. And to come to his example about the trade that you're having. That's all fine and well. We want this. But if we're opening those joint border posts, we must have stuff to trade. And to have stuff to trade, we must have industries to pick up. For our industries to pick up, we need local capital to be able to fund it. Otherwise, that's all a moot point.
Okay. Carol, I think that's a point well made, that at no point in time did you actually say that globalization or global capital or global partnerships are not important. What I think you are focusing on is the need to drive it from an African leadership and African capital point of view, right? Now, I'm going to come to you, Shara, because just slightly changing tack, but sticking to the definition of multilateralism. If you agree that one of the basic tenets of multilateralism is working together for common cause. Forget about proactively doing things. When there is a crisis, get together, join hands. COVID, as an example, comes readily to mind, where I feel that the continent was betrayed. So, how do you contextualize what was perhaps in the modern world's first global challenge from the prism of multilateralism?
I think it's important for us to really define multilateralism. In fact, I don't know if you guys have noticed, but as we've been talking, this side is coming closer to this side, right? Because we're saying, what does multilateralism mean? It is not a one size fits all, it is teamwork. So let's go to COVID. What happened at COVID? Teamwork happened within Africa. I'm not sure if you realize the brilliance within the continent between UNECA, the ministers of finance, the ministers of health, the Africa CDC. Lots of cooperation and teamwork happened internally. What we didn't see was what we needed as a teamwork externally. So, what did Africa decide? We were going to go on a path of health sovereignty. Dependency, the opposite of dependency is not isolation. Because guess what? We import 90+% of all pharmaceutical products for this continent. So on day one, we can't just go it alone. On day one, we need to work with others, the coalition of the willing, those who are ready to open their doors, bring in IP, bring in technology, create what we need so that we're on a journey of becoming a lot more self-sufficient. The opposite of dependency is not isolation. The opposite of dependency is leverage. It's partnership and it's choice. And that's what we're doing on the continent.
Okay, so I think you're kind of siding a bit with what Adamasu's earlier point was about whether globalization has failed, right? And I think the COVID example that you defended, yes, you're right. The way African institutions got together, created solidarity, was an example of what Africa can achieve when Africa decides to work together. But I'm still not sure whether that would fall under the broader term of multilateralism, as opposed to just a case of regional countries having to do things together because it was affecting them and help wasn't arriving, right? So I would like to keep that question still as a question, but I want to come to you, Bright, and kind of comment on one other aspect of multilateralism as we understand it from the schools and the colleges we went to, where we were told from a very early stage that there are certain rules and values and policies and consistencies that one should aspire to and one should maintain, and that is all captured in this catch-all phrase called governance, which we are wrapped on all the time. And I was actually attending a recent conference in Oxford Business School where I was asked about African governance, by the way. And I just said that when it comes to cronyism, nepotism, threatening judges, threatening governors of central banks, it's not an African monopoly. It has an orange hue at times, right? So what's your view, Bright, about this whole issue of how often rules are flouted and Africa is in no position to fight back on it?
So when we started, we were talking about Saint Jude, the patron saint of lost causes. Now we've evolved to the Apostle Judas because we very cleverly attempted a new treason. And that new treason is to try and distinguish between globalization and multilateralism and then introduce this really dangerous, Trojan horse called African multilateralism. Let me take you directly on African multilateralism and then I'll answer the question.
Are you taking her on?
Directly on the issue of African
Look at her when you're taking
No, Mr. Admas. African multilateralism is what gave us the Abuja Economic Treaty in 1991. That said we'll have an African Monetary Fund. That said we'll move to a common central bank. That said we're going to have very quickly free movement. Those are the very things that have failed. It's African multilateralism that gave us a single market that today refuses to be a single market. What has worked in place of African multilateralism, which I will redefine back to the hint that you gave us, Sanjeev, as a rule-based, consensus-driven model, what in place of that, which has worked, is this idea of a coalition of the willing ready to move when things align. That's the only thing that's worked. So when Dangote comes to Tanzania and Kenya and says, let's do a new energy corridor, you don't wait till you go to the AU and then you create a new treaty that purports to do this based on PIDA models, which for many, many decades have failed to work. So even the African variant doesn't work. This multilateral approach of consensus-driven systems based on rules that try to get all of us to sign the least common denominator doesn't work, even in Africa. So the only thing that works really is to get countries to align on mutual interest on a transactional basis and to drive forward. If you do that, the rules don't become extractive, they don't become parasitic, and they don't become what they've been now, which is that they've been weaponized to hold us back. Since when did we start trying the Doha development round? Since literally the early 2000s. For 2 decades, we've not been able to build a rule-based trading order. The WTO itself is now completely gutted. Seriously, the WTO model has failed to work. The Security Council is the total gridlock. For 4 decades, this is the worst use of veto power we've seen ever. So every time we try to use the consensus-based model, that doesn't work. Second point, and this is very critical. We have all the tools and the instruments to do the work better when it comes to getting resources to finance our infrastructure. Remittances are double the amount of value of aid. Remittances come from our own people, double. When it comes to doing remittances within our own continent, the cost is over 14%. 14%. Moving money within our own corridors. We should here be talking about things like PAPs, like REPs, new payment systems and the like that are not driven by treaty-based consensus, but they are driven because transactionally we know they work. Workability is the new order, is the new logic. That is our argument. Our argument is not that teamwork doesn't work, but it must work on a new logic rather than consensus-based, rule-based systems that have proven that they are simply extractive.
Okay, so
I can't wait to jump into the mix.
I'm
but
going to
I'll
bring
wait for
you.
to
I'm
give
going to
me
bring
the
you
floor.
just now. I could see you were itching, all right, and understandably so, with the onslaught that Brighter. Bright, you know, you're on my right side, but you're not necessarily right, I think, this time, in the sense that rules do get followed, right? And it's up to Africa in many ways to create the environment around which it can leverage your point, right? So I'll come to Adamasio. Obviously, you can say what you wish, Adamasio, and comment on anything that has been said. But I would also like you to talk a little bit that whilst rules are there, and I know rules generally get followed, the shorter to midterm flip-flopping that happens in terms of policies confuses the hell out of us, doesn't it, in terms of how we strategize. So I would like you to talk about it when you try to defend multilateralism. Because one thing I will say, Adamasri, and I don't know whether you'll agree with me, that whilst you said globalization is a different issue to multilateralization, I think that the two are kind of Siamese twins. They're joined at the hip, right?
They are, and I think this is where one needs perspective. I think we need to be clear that political multilateralism is one thing, and financial economic multilateralism is another. Of course, when you look at institutions that have actually made a huge contribution to Africa's economic agenda, many of them are African multilateral financial institutions. We're here with Africa 50, AFDB, AFC, Afreximbank, TDB. We are all born out of political multilateralism. If member states did not create us with the conviction not just of signing a treaty or an articles of association, if they did not capitalize us and commit to callable capital on the back of paid-in capital, we would not have the ratings we have, we wouldn't have the capacity we have. So we are evidence that multilateralism actually works in Africa. I think if you look back to about 2 years ago, in this very same conference room, we saw multilateralism at its best. Those of you who are here during the Mission 300 launch, it was a very special occasion. You had the African Development Bank, the World Bank, the Trade and Development Bank, and others. We were here in this particular conference room where we announced a huge initiative to electrify 300 Africans. And this was a very strong multilateral initiative that was built exactly around teamwork, exactly around solidarity. And we dealt with the issue of natural gas, which has been a sore point in terms of global justice, in terms of the transition, the energy transition. But the clean cooking initiative that we heard Her Excellency, the President of Tanzania, speak in her opening remarks yesterday, she was talking about the very quick movement that Tanzania has demonstrated in terms of all the millions of people that have received additional access to clean cooking fuel. A lot of that is born out of strong global multilateral partnerships with Tanzania and 20 other African countries. And so when you look at these kinds of very real initiatives that have been born out of unusual partnerships at a multilateral level, it's real. I can tell you this. One of the problems we have with energy access in Africa is you have a lot of rural problems where the grid does not go to the rural areas. So you need what we call mini grids, new technology, off-grid solutions. And our African enterprises are going to be very keen rolling out that kind of access off-grid. It's not the big utilities that are going to do it. And one of the things we discovered was we had a lot of debt to make available to these enterprises, but we discovered that they didn't have equity. They didn't have risk capital. So we could no longer lend to these African enterprises who are focused on rolling out this new access. Again, multilateralism, AFDB, World Bank, TDB, we came together and created an equity fund to give risk capital to enterprises, which is what is their binding constraint. People sometimes think it's debt, that's the problem. Sometimes our African enterprises are able to access debt, but they don't have enough equity, so they cannot leverage. And so now we have a special fund in Africa that's maybe 18 months old, where we're actually giving equity to African companies to go into the rural areas to do the off-grids, the mini-grids, and all of these new cutting-edge ways of generating access. And a lot of this money is also coming out of IDA. IDA 21 of the World Bank Group and ADF 11, just in the past couple of years, whoever remembers the numbers, they've been recapitalized, the replenishments. Despite the global environment being as complicated as you've highlighted, we have seen record levels of replenishments. The ADF, 23% replenishment, ADF 11. And kudos to Dr. Sidi, who achieved this within his first 12 months of office. The World Bank with IDA 21, $100 billion replenishment sitting at the global level, 75% of that earmarked to Africa. This is record levels of replenishments of these two concessional funds that are actually directed to Africa. So why I'm saying the baby is alive and well is that you have these kinds of very real, tangible, results that are demonstrating commitment. I think the bathwater is very dirty. And I think the things that you're saying, even at the continental level, you talk about all these protocols with free movement of people and the very slow pace of creating the single market. You're right. It's taken time. But if you take a view to when this was first announced, the Abuja Declaration, 1980, almost 45 years ago when it was first announced. But when did the ratifications happen? Just in the past five or so years, you've seen a dramatic increase of ratifications. AFCFTA came into force just over the past 5 or so years. And that is just genuine demonstration that the leadership of Africa, at least, are no longer sitting on their laurels. Because Lagos Action Plan 1980, we're now in 2026. Why did it take 46 years for this agenda to get movement? But it actually just got movement over the past 5 or so years. So I think the leadership of today is different from the leadership of the 1980s and 90s.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Now, I'll come to you. But Adamasio, I must stop you from lecturing these young men. They're still impressionable. They're still learning. That was becoming a tutorial, man. Okay.
But I think we need to distinguish between plurilateralism and multilateralism, because in a lot of ways, what he described is plurilateralism.
Okay. All right. Point taken. You can comment on that further. But just to sort of latch on to where Adamasio left it. Remember, Adamasio said what do you call the baby is still there. The bathwater is muddy. It can be cleaned up, but the baby is alive, right? Now, Kader, I want you to come in, and especially because I can now see your bosses in the room as well, right? and as the last time I checked, Africa 50 is a multilateral, right? Of some sort, right? And I believe you're trying to raise some money from multilaterals. So how do you reconcile all this with your opening comments?
We're an infrastructure investment platform with one specificity, which is that 100% of our capital at inception was African. One. Number two.
Who provided that?
African government. But I said African.
Okay.
Number two.
Wasn't there a multilateral involved?
No, hang on, I'm coming. Number two, raised the first fund with 20 plus African pension funds. Now, again, I'm always going to go back to my first point. I don't say go at it alone. I say we drive it with our partner. We decide the agenda. We no longer are going to be subject to what's happening in the world in regions where we have nothing to do with. That we can do. That is our definition. And that's what we're saying. Stop having your hand out and asking. And Africa 50 is living exactly that, but showing example. This was the first time that a fund was raised by so many African pension funds to show that it's possible. We have the money, the capacity on the continent. We don't need to be beholden to anyone. And just a couple points that Admasu made. At one point, I wanted to make some space between us here so we can bring him to this side, because he was making our point, frankly. But about the signatures and all these things, it goes to the point I keep mentioning. We need to stop being satisfied because IDA has raised 40% more money, this thing has increased 23%. What does that actually mean to me? What? So, have we seen results? Is it going to take another 4 or 5 years or 10 years to do the Turkana project or whichever? I'm not satisfied with announcement. I'm satisfied with results. And we're saying if we want results, we need to be the drivers because when we drive, like we've done with the IAF fund, we see results.
Okay, because Adam also left with one final point. He said that today's leadership is probably going to make a difference. And
It's right here. That's today's leadership.
Yeah, so he was looking at you guys. He wasn't looking at himself. But more importantly, he also said that the level of support and the level of progress that's been made in terms of institutional frameworks being built, boosted, funded is phenomenal, right? And you are saying, rightly so, that at the end of the day, are we better off in Africa from an infrastructure, education, healthcare, jobs, industrialization point of view? That's your point, right? Shara, I want to just come to you then and ask you this question. You kind of have, you understand Africa, of course, but you also understand one very important dynamic of Africa, which is the philanthropy world, right? How has multilateralism helped, if it has, in terms of philanthropy capital getting more mobilized to work in Africa?
So I think I want to start by making sure we clarify a few things. What multilateralism is not, it is not going it alone. It is not one size fits all. It is not Africa is the rule taker and otherwise other people are the rule makers. Because if we keep that train of thought, then we conflict the issue. Multilateralism simply is teamwork. Whether we have most of the funds and we dictate the rules, it's still teamwork. Whether we allow ourselves to be dictated upon is bad teamwork, but it's still teamwork. So in its definition, multilateralism is teamwork. I need us to understand that. And the argument and the debate is it over? I think we can agree it's not. I think we can agree it's not dead. The terms of engagement need to favor Africa. That's where we're splitting hairs. But to your question about philanthropy, has multilateralism helped philanthropy for Africa? I think that the current political dynamics, a few things are happening with philanthropy. When we look at our friends across the Atlantic, there's some organizations are getting crosshairs because if you fund things that are not within the friendshoring side, then they have, attention on you and maybe you shouldn't exist. So what we're seeing philanthropies do is look for more local African entities to fund, as opposed to maybe more global or international entities. So in one way, those people who are interested in funding things within the continent, are interested in supporting our future, are looking for local entities to work on. But I think the second thing is important. Philanthropy's shape and form on the continent is different from how it's done globally. Africans are very philanthropic. We're seeing a lot more institutionalization of African philanthropy as a reaction to what's happening with multilateralism and the geopolitical dimension. So I also think that needs to happen more and more, but it'll benefit us. We do need more Africans who are driving a Pan-African agenda as opposed to a local, country-led or region or where I'm from led philanthropy. So I do think philanthropy globally, African receiving philanthropy from the global entities and homegrown philanthropy will do better because of what's happening with multilateralism globally.
Okay. Good. We're running out of time. So, Bright, maybe say what you wanted to say, but also if you could put up your closing arguments on behalf of the motion, and then I'll get Adamasi to...
I think we are at the risk of declaring everything as multilateralism to the point where every diplomatic notion becomes multilateralism. Every attempt by countries to do anything together becomes multilateralism. If we allow that, we will completely dilute the essence of this debate. Those of you who have seen the wild beast migration know that, yes, the wild beast ran, But so also do the lions and the crocodiles and all the predators that want to eat these herbivores. You can call that true teamwork. You can say that the lions and the wild beasts and the antelopes, they're all working together and it's teamwork. But it's definitely not teamwork. This kind of teamwork is one that we repudiate completely on this side because the fundamental logic doesn't work. The basis of multilateralism is what you see in the WTO. This idea of rules like most favored nation, common yardstick, fundamental rules as we see in the Paris Accord, that's multilateralism. The problem is that the notion of power in geopolitics and geoeconomics and in global affairs has made this a fiction. That's the reality. We do not in any way misunderestimate the power of plurilateralism. The mechanisms by which countries in different coalitions, in different mechanisms of cooperation, try to achieve things, if their self-interest mutually aligns. We don't dispute that kind of mechanism in the world. It dates back all the way back to the Hanseatic League. Because if then we want to say that every time that countries work together, you have multilateralism, then we wouldn't have invented it in the 19th and the 20th century. There would have been no need to invent it. Multilateralism has a date. What we are saying on this side of the table is that it's now past its sell-by dates. That is the reality. What can replace multilateralism is the conversation worth having. What can replace multilateralism is clearly a world that created the internet, not based on treaties and common standard rules that were driven by a political yardstick basis, but based on this notion that yes, there are protocols that could be jointly deployed, and if it works for you, you join. So there's no compulsion in internet matters to accept every single protocol that is out there, like IPv6. Some accept, some don't. That is the nature of the new and emerging world. A world in which you don't have these rules that are assumed to be sacrosanct, and all of us are forced to comply with them in order to play the game. That is multilateralism, which repudiates.
Began to you. So, I have to chuckle back again. Your visualization of the migration. And I think what you were trying to say is that we mustn't confuse a race with teamwork. That's what you were trying to say, right? A race is somewhere where there is a winner and there is a loser. While to you, multilateralism is about teamwork that leads to everybody winning, more or less. I think that's pretty much how I summarize your last comment. I'll come to you, Adamasu, to kind of finally convince your audience that this motion must fail. And we will then ask you guys if you have any more final comments before we put it to a vote. All right, Adamasu, you get the final word.
Well, thank you so much, Sanjeev. I first of all wanted to say I can perhaps speak on both of our behalves to say we agree with one very important point that the other team has said, and that is Africans have to lead. Okay, our transformation has to be led by us. That's what we've seen in transformational Asia. That's what we've seen in all the cases around the world where there's been significant development. And you cannot outsource that. One of the biggest problems we have in our industry is we expect foreigners from outside of Africa to come and start projects and lead projects and become the rainmakers. That is a problematic scenario. That's why we're not moving, as you guys are saying. And I think we agree with that. And that's why we need to strengthen African champions and get African capital to take leadership with equity and to help put wind in the sails of African enterprises. Then they can attract capital from the world on the back of that. That is what we're missing at scale in Africa, right? If we're able to get the ball rolling, the rest of the world will come to the party much more easily. Not that they necessarily care or are committed to our cause, but it will become a value proposition that they cannot ignore. We heard the phenomenal story of Vietnam yesterday from Dr. Kabaruka. He talked about how they moved from 15 billion GDP to 500 billion GDP. Who did that for Vietnam? He talked about Japan and the aged, high-income economies around Vietnam, but they're not the ones who did it. The Vietnamese got the ball rolling. They went around, they studied the neighborhood, they understood their comparative advantages, and then they created an ecosystem and got the ball rolling. And then everybody saw the momentum, everybody piled in. And it's a similar story for the Southeast Asian miracle in general. The Asian tigers even did that before the Southeast Asians in terms of the original tigers. And so there's a very important point that you gentlemen are making that we agree with. But in the end, we have very big ships that need to sail. 1.4 billion Africans. We're coming from a very low base. We have to be smart to know to get those ships to move. We need a lot of wind in our sails. We have to be smart. We lead, we create the right ecosystem, but we have to attract, we have to leverage and get momentum behind us. Because on our terms to the extent that we can. And just as a final point on globalization, as much as globalization has been a very difficult concept for people to be positive about these days, I just want to cite one case where if we're smart, we can make it work for us. Take the case of Mozambique. About 2 years ago, US Exim out of the blue switched on the taps and approved a $5 billion financing package for the natural gas projects in Mozambique. Prior to this administration in the US, it was frozen. You needed a very bold gentleman like the gentleman there today to come in and say, natural gas is on, Africans need transitions. And it was an amazing start to the presidency of the very fine gentleman who's there. We know he has so many issues on other fronts, but I'm just saying there's always opportunities if we're smart and know how to follow it. Tanzania, I'm sure, is looking at that very closely. There's a lot of natural gas projects here that need big wind in the sails. Of course, we will come in and others will come in because as Africans, we have adopted and embraced the transition agenda. But in the end, to get $5–10 billion investments like Mozambique, we need to pave the way for others to come in and put their wind in the sails. And we have an important handmaiden role to play. We as Africans need to join forces together and make it easy for the rest of the world to come. I really have a fantastic relation with so many European partners. But on this issue, I find them to be very difficult, to be honest, because they don't come to the party. Strangely enough, it's the other power across the Atlantic. When you're talking natural gas, they surprise you and they say, sure, show us the projects, we'll come to the party. Japanese, the same. So I think this is where we have to be smart and selective and know who's going to be our critical partner in the initiatives that matter for us. And if we don't take the narrative by the bulls, by the horns, we will not know how to orchestrate the world to come in behind us. So I think my closing point is Africans have to lead.
Great. So thank you. We're going to put it on the vote just now. But if I may just summarize by kind of capturing everything that's been said from my left side, it is that multilateralism is probably a bit of a sick child. It needs a little more vitamin C and vitamin D and maybe some steroids to revive it. But it is not to be dismissed because of the obvious good that it has done and can still do. I think that's what I kind of heard from everything I heard from the left. The right-hand side seems to have said, in summary, apart from Bright's personal pain with all the things that hasn't happened in his life yet, is that any lateralism, unilateralism, multilateralism, bilateralism, will not work unless we take charge of our own destiny, right? And unless we use what we have, our money, our skills, our resources, our geopolitical understanding, your point, our ways of handling the flip-flops that global economies do, then we will not succeed. That's what I have heard so far. Any final comments from any of you before I put it to the jury?
One quick point. The best story that our opponents, used to illustrate his point was the success of the world's biggest anti-multilateralist, Trump. in funding LNG in Mozambique. That tells you everything you need to know about this debate.
This thing just lost you 10 votes, man. Okay.
One point from this side.
Yes.
One last point from this side.
Of course.
What we are saying on this side is, why don't we position ourselves so A, we lead, but B, other people follow our lead? That is multilateralism. Thank you.
Okay, good. On that, yeah, good. Big cheer for the debaters on either side, if I can. Thank you. And if I may ask the jury to vote with a show of hands. Does the motion, remember when we started, there was an overwhelming yes to the motion. And there was only one person who voted against the motion. Now, therefore, anything will be an improvement on this side. Okay? Anything. Okay? I was hoping that wouldn't be the case. But can I have a show of hands for those still for the motion? The motion is the era of multilateralism is over. Africa must learn to finance itself. And we now have an overwhelmingly low number of people who are saying yes to the motion. I want to see how many yeses do we have. It's not as many as we saw when we started. Okay, just to dispel any doubts about my eyesight to the rest of the world, who are the people against the motion?
They weren't here at the beginning.
I get the feeling that it's very close to call, very close to call, but I think the left side has carried it. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Africa 50, for provoking us and making it all very stimulating to end the conference. Thank you.
Wait. Family photo? We're taking a picture. Kajil? No, well done. Certainly to all of you. Fantastic. Thank you.
We must do something together.
Yes, we must. Yes, we must. And I think that conversation will certainly give us a whole lot more to discuss over lunch. Plenty of food for thought. And I do understand that food for the stomach is needed right now. But before we do break, can I just ask for one moment further of your patience? We've got our closing speaker who's just really going to say the final words and help us say goodbyes following protocol. When we do head out to lunch, just a short announcement regarding where lunch will be served, specifically for board members and the heads of the delegation. Could I please ask that when we do break for lunch in a short while, that the board members and heads of delegation make their way to the Ruaha, a room. It is on the ground floor on the left as you leave the plenary. Mind you, there's a lot of ushers outside who will be on standby to assist you should you need. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, just a few more moments of your patience are requested as we do get the closing remarks right now from Ms. Tepidi Muremong, the Chief Operating Officer at Africa 50. She with us? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. What an invigorating way to end our 2 days. Thank you so much, Sanjeev, for moderating that, and importantly for our panelists for taking what is not an easy subject. So it appears that actually multilateralism still wins the day, but with a slight twist, African multilateralism, it appears is what we are talking about. Your Excellencies, Honorable Ministers, distinguished shareholders and boards of Africa 50, heads of the various African and international institutional investors, business leaders and captains of industry. I am actually reading the wrong speech, but it's okay, I'll continue. I hope you can all agree with me that the past 2 days have been incredibly remarkable and productive. But none of this would have happened without you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged. As we conclude this year's Infra for Africa Forum, I leave with a renewed sense of confidence in what Africa can achieve when we work together with urgency, ambition, and a shared commitment to delivery. I think you're all aware that our theme these past 2 days has been from ambition to delivery. We've talked too long about Africa's potential. We all know it. So it's our time to deliver. On behalf of Africa 50, our board and shareholders, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to Her Excellency Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, President of the United Republic of Tanzania, for her leadership, her unwavering support for this forum, as for spending a significant part of yesterday with us. We truly do not take that for granted, Tanzania. Asante. I would also like to recognize those who were here present with us over the past 2 days. His Excellency Professor Kithure Kindiki, Deputy President of the Republic of Kenya. His Excellency, who's still with us here today, Dr. Jakaya Mrisho Kikwete, former President of the United Republic of Tanzania, and one of the founding presidents of Africa 50 in the AU Summit 2013. Thank you very much, sir. His Excellency Dr. Sidi Ulta, President of the African Development Bank Group and Chair of the Boards of Africa 50. His Excellency Wamkele Mene, Secretary General of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat. Honorable Minister Carlo Louveira, Minister of Finance of the Republic of Mozambique, representing His Excellency Daniel Francisco Chapo, President of the Republic of Mozambique. Thank you. Right Honorable Dr. Ekperikpe Ekpo, Minister of State for Petroleum Resources, representing His Excellency Bola Ahmed Tinubu, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Honorable Dr. El Haji Abdurrahman Diouf, Minister of Energy and Petroleum, representing His Excellency Bassirou Diomaye Faye, President of the Republic of Senegal. Honorable Ambassador Khamis Musa Omar, Minister of Finance of Tanzania, and our incredible co-host for this forum and general shareholders meeting. Thank you, sir. Our distinguished shareholders and board members. A special thank you also goes to the government organizing committee and the Africa 50 team who worked tirelessly together to make this forum a success. We've been talking about partnership, and this is truly what partnership is and what we've been able to demonstrate as partners between the private sector and the public sector. Our time here in Tanzania has demonstrated what from vision to delivery means in practice. We came here not only for important conversations, but to translate those conversations into investment, partnerships, and importantly, projects. And we did. Yesterday, we witnessed 5 agreements and investment commitments, spanning some infrastructure priorities that will shape our future, our growth as a continent. In Tanzania, TPDC, Taka Arabia, and Africa 50 advanced a partnership to expand the productive use of domestic natural gas, while Africa 50 and TANESCO formalized collaboration to advance electricity transmission public-private partnership. We had a very engaging panel earlier on the importance of transmission infrastructure and how we need to accelerate that. And this is really building on what Africa 50 has been pioneering, which is independent power transmission on the continent. And our partnership with Tanzania's Minister of Health will support the expansion of specialist healthcare, infrastructure, and access to quality renal care. We also secured more than US $70 million in new investment commitments from leading development finance institutions, including British International Investment, Proparco, and the Italian Climate Fund managed by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, strengthening our ability to invest in infrastructure and develop the next generation of bankable projects. So in as much as we had an argument about multilateralism, this is truly multilateralism actually at play. So to the naysayers, we've demonstrated what this is about. Ladies and gentlemen, these are not simply agreements just signed. They represent capital mobilized, both domestic and global capital mobilized. Partnerships that have been strengthened and projects that are moving closer to delivery and economic impact. I want to thank every single one of you as a participant who contributed to these discussions, the media who has traveled from far and wide to support us, and importantly, to tell the story not only of this forum, but to tell the story of Africa, to tell the story that infrastructure is an investable asset class. We're always talking about the challenges in Africa. We need to change that narrative and talk about the successes on our continent. And as we leave Dar es Salaam, beautiful Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, please let us carry forward the same spirit of partnership and urgency that has defined the past 2 days. Africa's infrastructure opportunity is clear. Our task, as all of us here, is truly about delivery. So thank you, asante sana, merci for being part of Africa 50's Infra for Africa Forum. I wish you all a safe journey back, but before we do so, as any African host would do, there's a little bit of something to carry you over through your journey. So please join us for lunch after this. Thank you very much.